I couldn't believe it when I stumbled upon the ad. A cabin for sale nestled in the woods for just 25 cents. It sounded too good to be true, but I figured, what did I have to lose? In the world of real estate, you hear about crazy deals, but this one was on a whole other level. A cabin, sitting on a plot of land that no one else had shown any interest in. I had to take a chance. The process was simple, almost too simple. I handed over my quarters, signed a few papers, and just like that, I was a proud owner of a piece of land that I knew I would turn into my sanctuary. The peace and tranquility of the secluded cabin was exactly what I needed after a chaotic year. I spent months fixing up the place, adding modern touches, and carefully restoring the cabin's original charm. It became my private getaway, a hidden gem in the forest. And then, as time passed, something unexpected happened. The real estate market boomed, and my cabin, once a 25-cent steal, skyrocketed in value. Before I knew it, my cabin was worth millions. $10 million, to be exact. But just when I thought I had it all figured out, a letter arrived in my mailbox that would change everything. The Homeowners Association, HOA, claimed that the land in the cabin actually belonged to them. I was stunned. How could they possibly stake a claim on something I bought outright? What followed was a legal battle I never saw coming. And that was only the beginning. It all started with an ad that seemed almost too absurd to be real. Cabin for sale, 25 cents. I remember seeing it while scrolling through a local classified website on a lazy Sunday afternoon. At first, I thought I'd misread it. I quickly refreshed the page, convinced there had to be a mistake. But no, the listing was still there. A small, weathered log cabin in a secluded area, nestled deep within the woods. The price? A quarter, a mere 25 cents. The ad was short, with no elaborate description or photos, just a location and a phone number. I had to stop and think for a moment. A cabin for 25 cents. It sounded too good to be true. I was no stranger to the strange deals that pop up online, but this one was pushing it. Was it a scam? Some kind of mistake? A practical joke? I had to investigate. My curiosity got the better of me. I dialed the number, half expecting to hear a recording or some outdated sales pitch. But the woman who answered was surprisingly calm, almost nonchalant, as if selling a cabin for a quarter was the most ordinary thing in the world. "Yes, that's correct," she said. "It's 25 cents. Just need you to come by and sign some paperwork. You can pick up the keys when you're ready." I couldn't believe my ears. I asked her to repeat herself, just to make sure I hadn't missed something. "You said the cabin is for 25 cents? "Yep, 25 cents. It's just sitting there, empty. We've tried to sell before, but no one's interested, so we're practically giving it away." She was so casual, and her matter-of-fact tone made it sound like the whole thing was completely normal. The disbelief started to wear off, replaced by something else. Excitement. Could this be my chance? A real cabin for nearly nothing? It sounded like a dream, a way out of the noise and chaos of city life. I had been craving a retreat, a place to escape, and the idea of having my own secluded cabin, surrounded by nothing but nature, was irresistibly appealing. I asked her for more details, location, condition, and any hidden costs. She gave me a vague description of the cabin, saying it was old but structurally sound. It didn't have any modern amenities, but it was perfect for someone who liked the idea of living off the grid. The property was located far enough from town that it would offer a complete solitude, but still within reasonable driving distance if I ever needed supplies. It was surrounded by dense woods, with a clear lake just beyond the trees. It seemed almost too perfect. But then again, if it was real, it was certainly too good to pass up. I was skeptical, but I was also intrigued. "Why are you selling it so cheap?" I asked. "Let's just say the cabin has a bit of history," she replied, her tone shifting slightly. "It's been sitting there for years, and the people who owned it before didn't take care of it. The HOA has been breathing down our necks to either fix it up or sell it. We just want to be done with it." She didn't seem to elaborate much on the HOA issue, but it was enough to give me pause. Was the HOA a problem? Was this some kind of warning? But still, the price was tempting. I decided to go see it in person. When I arrived at the cabin, I was immediately taken by its rustic charm. The building was a little worn, but there was something comforting about it. The walls were weathered, the wooden beams cracked and faded, but it had character. The cabin sat by the edge of a forest, and the air was thick with the earthy scent of pine. It was quiet, almost unnervingly so. No cars, no people, just the sound of rustling leaves and birdsong. It felt like I had stepped into another world, a peaceful one. The cabin was small, but it had all the potential I was looking for. A small front porch, a sloped roof covered in moss, and enough space to create something special. I stood there, taking it all in. This was exactly what I had been searching for. A retreat away from the hustle and bustle of my daily life, a place to escape to when things got overwhelming. The woman who sold me the cabin met me there. She was older, middle-aged, and dressed in a simple outfit, not flashy or pretentious in the least. She handed me the keys, and with one final look at the property, I signed the papers. The entire transaction had taken no more than 15 minutes. I walked away with the keys in my hand, feeling a little dazed but mostly thrilled. I couldn't believe I was the owner of a cabin for 25 cents. The idea that something so valuable, a tranquil cabin with a stunning lake view, could be mine for such a small amount was surreal. But as I drove away, I couldn't help but think about how lucky I was to have found this hidden gem. Little did I know, this impulsive decision would soon become the catalyst for a battle that would change everything. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the excitement of owning the cabin. It felt surreal. At times, I would just sit in my car in front of it, staring at the building, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. But despite the slight hesitation that still lingered, I felt a sense of purpose. I had a plan. I wasn't just going to leave the cabin as it was. I was going to transform it, restore its charm, and make it a perfect escape from the chaos of the world. The first thing I did was to take inventory of what I was working with. The cabin, though quaint, had clearly seen better days. The wooden beams that made up the walls were aging and splintered. Some of the windows were cracked or fogged up with age, and the roof sagged under years of neglect. But despite the obvious wear, I saw its potential. There was something timeless about the structure. I could envision the kind of place it could become, warm, welcoming, and rustic with modern touches to make it comfortable. I decided to begin with the basics. Securing the cabin, the foundation was solid, but the walls needed some attention. The old wood was weathered and brittle, so I knew I would have to replace sections of it. I spent days removing old boards and replacing them with fresh, untreated timber that would weather in its own time. It was back-breaking work, but there was something oddly satisfying about it. Every nail I hammered into the wood felt like a step closer to making the cabin my own. As I worked on the structure, I started thinking about the kind of atmosphere I wanted to create inside. The layout of the cabin was simple. Just one open room with a fireplace in the center, and a loft above that could be turned into a small bedroom. I envisioned a cozy living room with a large armchair by the fireplace, where I could read or just watch the flames flicker. The loft would be transformed into a quiet retreat for when I needed space to think. I imagined filling the cabin with mismatched furniture, vintage rugs, and soft lighting that would create a warm glow at night. It was going to be a sanctuary, and I could already feel the peace it would offer. But it wasn't just a structure that needed work. The surrounding property was just as important. The cabin sat in a secluded valley, with trees all around it and a small lake just beyond the trees. The land was overgrown. The weeds and wild grasses had taken over, and it was hard to even walk to the lake without tripping over a branch or stumbling through thick underbrush. I knew I would need to clear the land to make it more accessible. I rented a small tractor and spent a few weeks clearing the brush, creating pathways that wound their way through the trees, leading to the edge of the lake. While I worked, I noticed something strange. The more I cleared, the more I began to feel like I was uncovering something hidden, as if this cabin had secrets buried beneath its floors and behind its walls, waiting to be uncovered. It was probably just my imagination running wild, but there was a mysterious energy about the place that gave me chills. I brushed it off as normal. After all, it was an old building in the woods, and I was getting wrapped up in the thrill of restoring it. As the days passed, I started seeing the transformation take shape. The new boards I had installed were weathering beautifully, and the cabin was beginning to look more like the rustic retreat I had envisioned. Inside, the space was coming together. I found an old wood-burning stove at a nearby antique shop and had it installed in the living room. The floors, once cracked and uneven, were sanded down and stained to a rich, dark brown. I added a few simple touches, a couple of throw blankets on the couch, a few candles on the windowsills, and a hand-carved table I'd found at a flea market. It was starting to feel like home. But then, something unexpected happened. As I walked around the cabin one evening, taking in all the progress I had made, I began to notice strange markings on the floorboards. At first, I thought it was just a natural wear of the wood, but the more I looked, the more I realized the patterns were deliberate. They weren't random scratches. They were carved into wood, almost like symbols. I bent down to inspect them closer, and as I did, I noticed something else. The air seemed to grow colder. A chill ran through me, and for a split second, I felt like I wasn't alone. I stood up quickly, brushing the feeling aside. This was just an old cabin. After all, it had history. I was probably letting the isolation get to me. But still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something wasn't quite right. Days turned into weeks, and the cabin continued to take shape. The renovations were nearly complete, and it looked like the cozy retreat I had imagined. Yet, that feeling of unease lingered. Every time I entered the cabin, I couldn't shake the thought that there was more to this place than I realized. Something hidden, buried beneath the surface, just waiting to come to light. Despite the growing discomfort, I couldn't stop. The cabin was almost perfect. I could almost taste the tranquility it promised. But just as I was beginning to settle in, I started hearing whispers about the property. The locals spoke of the cabin's history, of the strange occurrences that had happened over the years. And then came the letter. The days after completion of the cabin renovations were some of the happiest of my life. Every morning, I would wake up to the sounds of birds calling out to each other, the rustling of leaves in the trees, and the quiet hum of the lake as it rippled against the shore. It was peaceful. It was exactly what I had been craving. A break from the fast-paced, stress-filled life I had been living. As the cabin began to take shape, something unexpected happened. Word started to spread. At first, it was just a trickle. A few locals stopped by, curious about the changes I'd made to property. They complimented me on the renovations, but there was something more in their eyes. They weren't just admiring the cabin. They were sizing it up. It was as if they could already see the potential that I had only just begun to realize. Soon enough, the trickle turned into a stream. People I didn't know began showing up at the cabin, asking about its history and whether I was selling it. They would inquire about the land, curious if there was anything available for purchase nearby. There was talk of developers who were eyeing properties like mine, secluded land with easy access to the lake, a hidden gem just waiting to be discovered. I never thought much of it at first. I was too absorbed in my own little world to care about the real estate market. But then came the first offer. It was from a well-known developer who had been eyeing properties in the area. They made an offer I couldn't believe, $100,000. The offer was tempting, but I wasn't ready to let go of the cabin just yet. It was mine. I had worked hard for it, and it had become more than just a place to live. It had become a symbol of my freedom, my escape. But the offers didn't stop. They only increased in value, each one more substantial than the last. Soon enough, the cabin, which had once been a mere 25 cents purchase, was worth $500,000. Then a year later, it crossed the $1 million mark. The interest kept growing, and with it, the potential value of the property. I had no idea how much the land was worth until I saw the offers piling up. By the time I received an appraisal, I was stunned. The cabin, once a forgotten piece of land with an ancient structure, was now valued at an astounding $10 million. I had to stop and process the information. How could this be? A cabin that I had bought for 25 cents just a year ago was now worth more money than I had ever dreamed of. It was as if I had stumbled upon an undiscovered gold mine. The rise in value was a mix of factors. The area had become increasingly desirable, particularly for those seeking peaceful, private retreats. The lake was pristine, the forest dense and unspoiled. The location had become prime real estate for wealthy buyers looking for a weekend getaway, and the cabin, with its stunning views and charming rustic appearance, was an attractive option. The nearby towns had grown in popularity, and with them, the demand for properties that offered seclusion but still weren't too far from modern amenities. I could barely believe it. The idea of selling it crossed my mind, but I wasn't ready. It felt like too much of a loss. This cabin had become a part of me. I had poured my heart and soul into it, and the thought of giving it up, even for a fortune, left a bitter taste in my mouth. But the excitement of the cabin's rise in value soon turned into something more. As my property's value skyrocketed, so did the attention it received. Developers began to see it as a prime piece of land that could be redeveloped into something even bigger and more profitable. The whispers in town grew louder. There was talk of building a luxury resort on the lake, or perhaps a private estate with the cabin as a centerpiece. But there was one entity that wasn't whispering, the Homeowners Association HOA. They weren't just talking, they were acting. I received the first letter from them about a month after the cabin's value had reached its peak. It was a formal letter, stiff and impersonal. They claimed that the land, which had once been outside of their jurisdiction, was now part of their neighborhood development plans. They stated that, due to new zoning laws, the HOA now had full control over the property. The letter went on to assert that the cabin, despite being mine legally, was effectively under their oversight. They wanted me to sign a contract that would align the property with community guidelines. I thought it was a mistake at first. I had no dealings with the HOA when I purchased the cabin. It wasn't part of any gated community or planned development. The land had been isolated for years, free from any HOA control. But their letter was clear. They claimed ownership of the land, and they weren't asking for permission. They were demanding compliance. I ignored the first letter, thinking it was some sort of misunderstanding. But then came another, and then another. Each letter was more forceful than the last. They were persistent, and their demands were becoming clearer. They wanted me to either pay for their membership fees or, worse, agree to sell the property to them at a price that was far less than its worth. It was becoming a nightmare. The peaceful retreat I had worked so hard to create was now at risk. And it wasn't just the developers anymore. It was the HOA with its arrogant demands and its claim on something that was mine. I couldn't believe it. How had things spiraled so quickly? What had started as a bargain deal for a cabin had turned into a legal battle. And I was about to find out just how far the HOA was willing to go to take what they wanted. It didn't take long for the letters from the Homeowners Association HOA to escalate from polite requests to outright threats. Every time I thought things had reached a boiling point, they pushed further. The letters grew more forceful, more aggressive. At first, I thought I could handle it. After all, I owned the property. I had the legal deed to prove it. How could they possibly claim ownership of something I had bought fair and square? The first time I saw Karen, the woman behind the HOA's operations, I knew this wasn't going to be an easy battle. She arrived unannounced one afternoon, stepping out a sleek black car with tinted windows. Her lean frame was sharp and composed, her bright pink suit standing out starkly against the surrounding greenery. She looked like someone who was used to getting what she wanted, and fast. She didn't offer a handshake when I stepped outside to greet her. Instead, she walked straight past me, her heels clicking on the gravel path like a ticking clock. "I'm Karen," she said coolly, her voice carrying an air of authority. "I represent the HOA, and I need to speak with you about your property." I could already feel the tension in the air. There was no warmth in her voice, just cold precision. She didn't ask if I was free for a conversation or if it was a good time. She just assumed that I would drop everything to listen to what she had to say. I nodded stiffly and motioned for her to follow me inside the cabin. Once we were in the living room, I gestured toward the worn but comfortable chairs near the fireplace. "What's this all about, Karen?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Karen didn't waste any time. She launched straight into her pitch, outlining the HOA's position with the sort of practiced calm that only someone who had done this 1,000 times could muster. "The cabin you purchased," she began, "was on land that falls under the jurisdiction of our community plan. It wasn't included in the original sales documents, but that doesn't change the fact that the property is now part of our oversight. We had several meetings about this, and I'm here to offer you a simple solution. You sign over ownership to the HOA, and we'll make sure everything is taken care of. I blinked, stunned. Sign over ownership? This land is mine. I paid for it. I put time, money, and sweat into restoring it. You can't just take it from me. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing with a cold precision. It's not about taking it from you. It's about doing what's best for the community. We're offering you a fair price for your land, far more than what you paid for it. Think of it as a win-win situation for everyone. I was furious. A fair price? You're trying to take it from me at a fraction of its value. I'm not selling, Karen. This cabin is my home now. I've made it my life's project. Karen's expression didn't change. She wasn't fazed by my words at all. If anything, her smile grew more smug. I understand that you're attached to the place. That's perfectly normal. But you don't understand the bigger picture. We need that land for future developments. This area is growing. A luxury resort by the lake. Upscale housing. You'd be doing the community a favor. Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. The reality of the situation began to settle in. This wasn't just about me and my cabin. This was about something much bigger. Something I wasn't prepared for. Karen's HOA wasn't about community well-being or peaceful living. It was about profit, development, and control. They wanted to turn this entire area into a thriving commercial zone, and my cabin, in its quaint little corner, was standing in the way. I could feel my resolve weakening, but I fought it. I won't sell, I repeated, my voice firm despite the doubt creeping in. You have no right to take it. She sat back in her chair, a faint glimmer of amusement in her eyes. Oh, we have every right, and we'll get it one way or another. She handed me another letter, one that was more formal than the last. It was an eviction notice, not for me personally, but for the cabin. They were claiming that the property was now part of their development plan, and they demanded that I vacate the premises. They gave me a mere 30 days to comply, threatening legal action if I refused. I stared at the letter, feeling my stomach twist. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. This was war. They weren't going to back down, and neither was I. The peaceful life I had envisioned was crumbling in front of my eyes. The cabin, which had once been my sanctuary, was now a pawn in a larger game, one I hadn't even known I was playing. Karen stood up, brushing imaginary dust off her suit as she moved toward the door. You'll reconsider, I'm sure. Think about it carefully. The offer stands, and it won't last forever. She left as swiftly as she had come, her pink suit flashing in the sunlight as she disappeared down the driveway. I stood there for a moment, feeling like I had been hit by a freight train. My hands were shaking as I held the eviction letter. And for the first time, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake in buying this cabin. But then, I looked out the window, at the trees, the lake, the cabin that I had worked so hard to restore. I wasn't about to give it up without a fight. Whatever Karen and the HOA had planned, I was ready to stand my ground. This wasn't just about a piece of property anymore. It was about principle. And I wasn't going to let them. The moment Karen left that day, I knew this wasn't going to be over quickly. I had no choice but to fight. The cabin, the life I had started to build around it, it was all at stake. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was up against something far bigger than myself. The HOA wasn't just some local organization. They were a force, well-funded and well-connected, with an agenda that extended far beyond the woods I called home. The next few days were a whirlwind of paperwork, phone calls, and sleepless nights. I spent hours at the local courthouse, sorting through land records, searching for anything that could help me understand how the HOA could claim ownership of my property. But the more I dug, the more confused I became. The land I had purchased wasn't part of any HOA-controlled neighborhood. It wasn't in a gated community. It wasn't on a private street. It was just a cabin, sitting on a piece of land that had been abandoned for years. How could they possibly lay claim to it? I contacted a lawyer, hoping to find someone who could navigate the legal maze I had found myself in. The lawyer I spoke with was seasoned, experienced in property law. But even he was baffled by the HOA's actions. This isn't normal, he said, shaking his head as he reviewed the documents. They're pushing boundaries, but it's not uncommon for powerful organizations to try and seize property under the guise of development. They're banking on you not knowing the rules. The lawyer suggested we file an injunction, an order that would temporarily halt any action the HOA might take against my cabin while we sorted things out in court. It was a long shot, but it was the only way forward. I signed the papers and handed over the fee, knowing that this was only the beginning of what would be a long and costly battle. As the legal proceedings moved forward, I began to feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I was no longer just a person fighting for a cabin. I was now a symbol of resistance. The HOA was a massive organization, but the more I spoke with others in the area, the more I realized that I wasn't the only one they had targeted. I began hearing stories of other landowners who had been bullied into selling their properties, all under the guise of community improvement. The HOA's tactics were ruthless, and they weren't afraid to use the legal system to bend people to their will. I had become a part of something much bigger than I had ever intended. What had started as a dream of owning a cabin in the woods had turned into a fight for my rights, for the rights of others in the community, and for the preservation of the land that had been untouched for generations. The court date was set, and soon enough, the day arrived. I sat in the back of the courtroom, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched Karen walk in, her smug expression as cold and calculated as ever. She was dressed in her signature bright pink suit, which almost seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights. The rest of the HOA's legal team sat beside her, all looking far more polished and prepared than I could ever hope to be. My lawyer stood next to me, ready for battle. The judge, an older man with graying hair and sharp eyes, called the case to order. I could feel the tension in the air, thick with anticipation. This was it. This was where everything would either fall apart or come together. Karen's lawyer was the first to speak. He outlined the HOA's position, claiming that my cabin violated certain zoning laws and that the land it sat on was, in fact, under the HOA's jurisdiction. The argument was based on new development plans that had been approved by the local government, which included the area where my cabin was located. They claimed that the land had been misclassified and that the HOA was within its rights to oversee the property. But my lawyer wasn't convinced. He countered by pointing out that there was no official documentation that placed the cabin within the HOA's boundaries. The original land deed was clear, and it didn't mention anything about HOA control. There were no restrictions on the property when I purchased it, and no mention of any future development or zoning changes. The cabin, he argued, was not part of the community plan that Karen's HOA was pushing. The back and forth continued for hours, each side presenting their arguments with all the legal jargon and fine print that I barely understood. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't going to let them take this from me. I had fought too hard to give it up now. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the judge called for a recess. I stood up and walked to the back of the courtroom, trying to catch my breath. My lawyer followed me, giving me a reassuring nod. "It's not over yet. We got a strong case," he said. But then, just as I started to relax, Karen stood up from her seat and approached me. Her heels clicked loudly on the floor as she made her way toward me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "You don't belong here," she said coldly, her words slicing through the air. "You're just a pawn in a bigger game. This land will be ours, whether you like it or not." Her words were meant to intimidate, and for a moment, they did. But as I looked around the courtroom, at my lawyer, at the people who were standing behind me, and at the land I had fought so hard to protect, I realized something. I wasn't alone in this fight, and Karen's threats, no matter how cold and calculated, weren't going to scare me anymore.